Soy.
Present.
Ms. Wattenberg.
Present.
Dr. O'Leary.
Present.
Dr. Sutter.
Present.
Ms. Thompson gets her regrets, she'll be here a little bit late. Dr. Reed.
Present.
Mr. Patterson.
Present.
Mr. O'Sullivan. Ms. Dell. President Parker.
Present.
Mr. President, you have quorum.
Is that a proxy?
Thank you, Mr. Hayworth. Members, you have the agenda for our working session. Next on the agenda is the leadership report. I'm actually going to move the leadership report to later in tonight's meeting, preceding our committee reports, because I think some of what we're going to discuss earlier in the meeting will be relevant later in that report. So next up, we have the executive director report. Mr. Hayworth.
So my dog Sassafras has decided that she wants to be part of this meeting. So excuse me 1 second. Okay, here we go. Thank you, Mr. President. So the executive director's report tonight will actually be fairly short. As members know, we do have performance oversight hearing next week. I learned today that the likely timing for that will be that we will be going with, in addition to other agencies, between 3 and 6 p.m. on March 10th. So members, feel free to watch. As you know, President Parker will be speaking on the agency's behalf at that meeting. We expect that the DCPS will likely go first, and it's starting at 9 a.m. And then at the noon to 3 o'clock block will be potentially OSSI, PCSB, and DME. And then the State Board, Office of Ombudsman for Public Education, and the Office of the Student Advocate will go together potentially with either DME or PCSB, depending on how it all comes together with the Committee of the Whole's schedule. I also want to note that the council did approve a delay in the budget process for this year. So the mayor's budget will not be required to be submitted to the council until mid-April. I believe the date is April 22nd. And then the mayor will be addressing the council on on April 23rd. Because of that, that means that our budget hearings will also be delayed because they are scheduled for April 22nd or April 23rd. So it is likely that it will be moved at least a week and possibly longer into May. It depends on the scheduling that the budget office comes, the council's budget office comes out with. And I will let you know as soon as we know that information. I did also learn that we may get some updates from the mayor's budget office in the coming weeks related to priorities for the federal spending in the potential COVID relief package that Congress is currently anticipating looking at in the House and Senate House this week, I believe Senate next week. At current time, the bill has around $2 billion for the District of Columbia. That does include $753 million to make up the cost from previous COVID bills in which the district was shortchanged and did not receive as much funding as states did. The remainder of the funding is designated for economic recovery, but it's sort of unclear what exactly that means. I know the Executive Office of the Mayor is already working on those, on what the priorities are going to be for the Mayor's office for those types of things. But that's why the budget has been delayed until April, so that they can incorporate that into their budget allocations for the local government. And that's it, Mr. President. Yes, that's right.
Mr. Hayworth. Representative Wattenberg.
Yeah, I don't know if you can answer this, John Paul, but one of the issues around the budget is, in addition to the stimulus that you're talking about, which is sort of moving into DC now, we know there's going to be another great big stimulus coming on, hopefully not too long from now, that should alleviate a lot of the budget pain in the school budgets. And yet schools are being asked right now, I mean, they're sitting there trying to go through line by line, you know, how to cut a half a staff person or a staff person and a half and cut different programs, which seems like such a waste of time when presumably a good deal more money is going to come. Has anybody talked about that? Do you have any idea how that would work?
Well, I think I would characterize it slightly differently. Schools are currently looking at their initial budget allocations, which is not the same thing as their final budget. So that does not include supplemental funding or additional funding requests from central office or for central office programming. And so this is the initial budget process for the schools is the same this year as it has been every year. And it's largely based on projected enrollments, which are challenging in terms of how to determine that type of thing, especially this year when we had a significant enrollment drop, what exactly that's going to mean over the long term. So I think it is challenging for schools, but if they don't do it now and provide that information to DCBS Central by the end of March, it means that information is almost impossible to include in the mayor's budget in for April 22nd. So I think it certainly is challenging, like you noted, but it is also sort of just the way that the process has to work.
I guess just to push back a little bit, it is different. Schools are doing this right now. They are spending their time doing it right now. Yes, that's what they always have to do. But this time we know the end result is going to be different. So I just want to say it would be nice if somebody could figure out a different way to do it. So I just wanted to check, but I think it's a problem, but for later or for other people, maybe for the chancellor.
Any other questions?
Awesome.
Great. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. For members of the public, OSSE recently requested a waiver from statewide assessments, in particular PARC and math and ELA. And so we're providing space for us to discuss this request and allow members to elevate questions, concerns, thoughts regarding that request of waiver. It is to my understanding, we have not heard back from the U.S. Department of Education as to whether or not they will approve such a waiver. That said, we have members roughly 45 minutes slated for this conversation. If you are okay with it, I would love to just judge based on how lively the dialogue is, whether or not we take that full time. So with that,
Mr. President, could I offer one clarification before we begin the thing?
yes.
So I do want to note that OSSE has not yet applied for that waiver, although they have announced to LEAs that they intend to do so. It's a slight difference, but I think it's one to note.
Got it. Yes, they have not officially applied for that waiver. But yes, thank you. How we're gonna engage in dialogue, I'm assuming everyone's gonna wanna speak, so it's not a matter of raising hands. Student Representative O'Sullivan and Student Representative Dale, why don't we start with you all as our student reps? And then for today's discussion, let's start in reverse order. If you care to speak about it, sharing your thoughts. So Student Representative O'Sullivan, do you want to kick us off?
Wait, what is this exactly?
This is around the request, OSSE's desire to request a waiver.
Oh, are we just sharing our thoughts?
Yeah, thoughts, concerns, reactions to that request, given that there was a lot of public interest. And I know members some have thoughts, some have concerns, some have questions. And so now is the opportunity for you to put those on the record.
I mean, I support OSSE looking for a waiver to be exempt from doing it this year. And I think the public testimony that we've gotten in the past couple meetings and just talking to people, I think would also support that. So I think like being kind of listening to what the students, what the teachers want right now, and also thinking about what's practical and what could in any event actually be useful in terms of data collection. I don't think this year would, like, at home standardized tests, PARC would be very effective at capturing students' knowledge or their ability to study for the test, because I also think it'll be hard to take the test in the first place. And that's also why, like, on AP exams, they're changing it up depending on if it's an at-home exam. So I just don't think like this is something that's very practical for students to do at home. And I think under the current circumstances, it isn't in the best interest of like our students and their number one priority, which I think is overall mental health. I don't think testing is going to be it is going to positively contribute to their overall experience. And I think it may be somewhat stressful as well.
Thank you for that. Student Rep Dale.
Yeah, so I want to agree with Alex as well as Aussie on looking for a waiver in regards to testing. This year, with the high levels of learning loss, it just doesn't make sense to require students to be tested, one, for mental health reasons, and two, it just wouldn't be accurate in regards to collecting data. That's mostly what I would like to say, but I also think it just wouldn't be practical for not only students, but also schools to find ways to administer this test and administer it so that we have kind of the same comfortability that we've had in past years where we've been in the building, because that contributes to our performance as well. So that's what I'd like to say.
Thank you. Members, I will remind you that Darren on staff shared a memo that is detailing what various states are doing. So for this conversation, I've asked Mr. Hayworth to check that out for your reference, but I would also encourage you to check that out. Representative Reed.
I'm thrilled to see the waiver for a variety of reasons. A, it's in alignment with what we've heard from many of our constituents. B, having talked to a school, I think they mentioned when the exact, when it was announced that testing was going to happen, I believe the plans for administering Park were going to be due right within like a week or some crazy deadline that everyone's going to have to scramble on top of what was already happening around distance learning. So I know the schools were thrilled. Additionally, the testing window would have had to be expanded. I asked what Park testing looks like on a regular year. I think folks were saying like 4 to 6 weeks or something like that. This school predicted about 6 to 8 weeks, and then also having to figure out how to get kids in and around testing. So I'm glad to see it happen. I don't think it's another layer that we need to add. This school also mentioned in the school's rocket ship, one of the Ward 8 campuses, mentioned that they were able to figure out what was going on with their students on their own. They were able to look and see, when students initially, I think when they kind of started school getting more, I guess, virtual or just kind of up and running, they noticed some differences in skill sets. They immediately adjusted, and they've seen changes almost a year in progress. So I think schools have the capacity to make adjustments where adjustments are needed to be made based on what they can do already without the added layer of this. I will say also, I need to read the U.S. Department of Education's information on the waiver, but I've heard there's a lot of flexibilities in it. But ultimately, happy to see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Thompson.
Yes, I mean, I had a moment to look at Darren's memo, which is actually quite helpful. One of the things that that stood out to me was that despite OSCE seeking this request, is likely to be denied. And if it is denied, I think I would like as a representative to better understand what OSCE's plan B is. I know we heard from a lot of educators which assessments they value as far, and I know they're not summative assessments, but I would like to better understand like what OSCE's guidance would be around like good enough for like across the map. So like I know like MAP and NWEA, they're not necessarily the same. So I like guidance around that. I'd also like some assurances around the things we brought up around the stars and like what the public sees. So like I know that we had talked about possibly making sure the report cards come out and they don't reflect like old data. I think that's particularly important. I've heard that my school DC applications are down this year by a lot. And so I'm curious to know kind of what information we're sharing with families about instruction and what school quality means, what we'll use to make decisions around, I guess we're calling it acceleration of learning. I think those are the questions I have more so than anything else. I think the public was pretty clear as far as what they brought to us around what they didn't want. I'm now looking to OSSI to set a framework around kind of like what does good look like. And I think that can be informative, not just in this moment of trying to recover, but moving forward as far as reimagining assessment and accountability. So that's what I would be looking forward to, and also hoping to do some engagement with schools and educators around.
Thank you. Representative Sutter.
Thank you. Echoing Representative Thompson, the literal first thing I have in my notes is what's Plan B since New York got rejected on their initial waiver. My thinking, and as I read Darren's great memo and the Department of Ed guidance, is that the department will consider state-specific conditions. What I wonder is if the state of New York is told, figure it out, I'm not sure a jurisdiction the size of the District of Columbia is going to be able to make a reasonable argument that we can't figure it out. So that's my concern, is what is our Plan B if that waiver is rejected? On that same front, what's the timing for this? How soon can we expect a response from the Department of Ed? And what then does that mean for not just Plan B, but also Plan C? Because if Plan B involves testing later this spring or towards the end of the school year, is there also another option to do the testing in the fall, which seems to be something permitted under the department's guidance? Two other things. One is, I hear a key pushback from the public being this wasn't a standardized year, so we shouldn't get standardized test data and we should use what schools know best. One question I have, and I'm absolutely clear and understand that there's a lot of practical hurdles with giving the tests, as well as social, emotional, and mental health hurdles with folks who feel pressure around the test, both educators and students. But I think one of the points of having a common assessment across the state rather than school by school selected measures is to say, you all approached this year differently. Different schools had different models, different people approach the instruction differently. But what's the common set of questions we're asking to say, did any of those models work better than others at helping students accomplish what we would expect for a year's worth of growth? So I do think there's some value in having some sort of common metric that every school would take part in, so that we could get a sense of like what worked, not just for individual students, but at the system level. What did the system learn about what worked and what didn't? The last thing is on the My School DC applications, I heard the same thing. The number I've heard tossed around is that the applications were down by 40%. But I understand that the biggest hit was at preschool. And that makes very good sense. And something I also wonder about in this timing is if we didn't give families the assurance that preschool would happen in person in the fall, if I were the parent of a preschooler, I don't think I would have applied either, given that I would not have a child attending school in person and be able to count on that experience. So I wonder what we can do to help families think about what fall looks like and what that might mean for the post-lottery application period. I'm curious whether the stars being displayed from prior years had any effect, but seeing as how preschool seems to have had the biggest decline, I think it may be less about the stars and more about we don't know what school's going to look like in the fall. So those are my thoughts so far.
Thank you. Representative O'Leary.
Jessica was talking about Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. I haven't seen Plan A. If Plan A was that they're going to give the park test, as you know, I'm totally against the park test. I think it's a horrible test. I don't think it has any value for our students at all. There are plenty of standardized, I'm not against standardized tests at all. There are plenty of standardized tests that can be given that will reflect our students and what they learn. I think it's an unfair test. I think that if even the communication, everyone in the city thinks that we're not giving the park test now. That's because Ossie applied for a waiver and the information came out, and now everybody thinks, all right, we're not giving the park test. What are we going to do? And that's not even true. So I think it's another communication breakdown. There are all kinds of tests that you can evaluate students at the beginning of the year and then evaluate them at the end of the year that will allow to see what kind of growth the students have made. And they've been brought up forever. I know I've been bringing it up forever. I was in charge of testing at Cardozo, and we gave a test, a reading test at the beginning of the year, testing vocabulary and critical reading skills, and everybody gave it, and we got results at the beginning and the end of the year, and we had the data that would prove things. So it's not there. It's just that people are afraid to go outside the bubble, and the bubble is very dangerous. And I also think that, let's say that the waiver is given, we need to find out where our students are right now in the middle of March as far as especially their reading and math skills. You can find that out in 2 days by testing the students. And I think it's important that we find out where they are. I don't have any idea where the students are as far as their learning loss or whatever you want to call it. I'm a big believer that learning loss is not something that's going to last forever. Our students are very flexible and very resilient, and they'll recover just like all of us will. I'm done.
Thank you. Representative Wattenberg.
Yeah, I guess I, in a way, don't know what to say, because if we don't get it, then what happens? Or is there going to be a process for proctoring it? And these are going to happen in people's homes? Do we have any system for that? As people said, are we waiting to the fall, which seems like, wow, what a not great way to start the fall. So I'm unhappy, as is everybody else. One point, it's both a comment on and a question to Fraser and others, which is, I think we do want to end the year knowing where people are. If we find out today, find out in April, find out in May, we do need to know where students are. And my sense is that schools are in a position to do that, that the schools themselves, I think are no exceptions. Either they use MAP or they use NWEA or they use, various other kinds of assessments. And so I think that's less of an issue. And if somebody thinks I'm wrong on that, I really do want to know. The bigger issue is the ability to sort of see, across the city, what the situation is, so that we can take steps to provide needed assistance. Because, I agree that, yes, our students are versatile, but are resilient, but it's a problem when people fall behind, especially if they're already behind. It's a problem, and we want to know where people are so that we can provide the necessary assistance. So that's what I'm most concerned about. That's it.
Thank you, Representative Chang. And I would encourage members to check out the chat. I appreciate the lively discussion. I've also seen some questions raised there. So, Representative Chang.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree that I think it's important to have plans laid out and communicated clearly. Jessica had written in the chat a question about why folks are thinking that park has already been canceled, and I do think that there's a role that all of us may have to play to go back to the folks in our community to say, hey, this is a waiver, right, that we're applying for. New York's was denied. This may not happen, right? Because I think part of the distrust that's built up from communities to the education system in the city is that people feel like the rug gets pulled under them so frequently, right? And if this waiver is denied and folks are told late that actually you are taking the park exam, I think that's another bad, it's just another bad scenario for all of us, actually, right? And so what is the role that we want to be playing in terms of making sure that we're communicating where we are actually right now, and also setting expectations about, this is what happens if it's waived, and this is what happens if it isn't.
Jocelyn agrees. She gave you a clapping hand emoji. But thank you, Representative Chang. Representative Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. And when you get to go almost last, you get to hear everyone's comments and you get to glean their knowledge, so to speak, and work off of some of the things that have already been stated. From the very outset, I've been kind of against the park, not against standardized tests, but against the park. And I did a lot of listening tours, so to speak, both of charter and of DCPS teachers, students, parents, and that seems to be a consensus. And so, in doing that, I think we also have to say that there's an opportunity that's here, even if we don't get the waiver, is to start looking at what does DC possibly move to outside of the park. We're one of the last jurisdictions that actually uses the park. We know across the board, there's almost a pretty good consensus that people do not like the park. And I think if we are denied the waiver, I think this is an opportunity to say, okay, so what can we replace the park with? What type of tests would we like to see the district move to that is not as antiquated and not as cumbersome to administer, that works a lot better for the District of Columbia and would be better suited for our educators, our families, and our students. So that's kind of where I'm headed. And my mindset is what is an alternative to the park? Because I've just heard overwhelmingly, people are not happy with the park regardless. I think this is just a year where people have an opportunity to say, we don't want to take it, but we need to move past that and say, is this a time and an opportunity to say it's time to do away with the park and find another assessment? Thank you.
Thank you. Vice President Gasoy.
Thank you. Yes, I was very disappointed when I saw that New York had been denied, and I am assuming that our waiver will be denied as well. So I guess what I have been thinking about is, given that we, assuming that we have to give the park this year, but that it won't impact schools' star rating or, be used for teacher evaluations, hopefully. Can we recommend that schools don't spend time prepping for it, and that it really is just like, give the test for what it's worth? Because that is sort of the impression I'm getting, is that it's for what it's worth, give this. And, I will say that when President Parker and I met with Chancellor Farabee, we asked him about his thoughts on assessment this year. And he said, well, the park, if given remotely, really, we have to question the integrity, right? And that's what I've been thinking all along. Like, I don't think we can say very much from the data we get. My impression is that the reason the DOE is insisting on this is because if we miss 2 years of state level testing, that we may have to rethink standardized testing. And that's kind of what I was hoping, not realistically, but just, when I get to daydream now and then, I think, wow,